Hello there, and welcome to Lesson 8 of Basics of Biblical Archaeology. It's good to have you. I think you're going to enjoy this site we're going to look at next. You know, I wonder if I were to ask you, what was the biggest and most important city in all of Canaan at the time before the Israelites arrived? What would you say is the answer? What site? Is it Jerusalem? Is it Lachish? Is it something else? What is that biggest city? Well, it just happens to be that the site of Hazor is the greatest and largest site in ancient Canaan. I actually was part of the dig at Hazor. It's a site I just love to death, and it's so important for understanding the timing of the conquest under Joshua. And you may not know it, but there's a big dispute about the timing of the conquest. In what century did it happen? At the end of the 15th century? At near the end of the 13th century BC? Or was it at some other time, as people would suggest? So it's a really important question. And the site of Hazor helps us, I think, to be able to solve that question with great certainty and going into great depth. I wrote a journal article on the site of Hazor and published it in 2008. And in that article, I tried to argue for the timing of the destruction of Hazor under Joshua, and then the timing for the destruction of Hazor under Deborah and Barak, two of the judges of Israel who lived after Joshua. So that's an article that you may want to read. You can download it for free from my academia.edu webpage and enjoy reading it and seeing if you agree or if you have issues or questions, which you're always able to ask me if you have any interest. I'd love to be able to help you out. All right, so let's look at the site of Hazor, this very important site of Canaan. And it's so important, we're going to divide the study of Hazor into two lessons. So lesson 8 will be the first half, and lesson 9 will be the second half. The dividing point will be the actual conquest itself under Joshua. So we'll go down to that point from the beginning of the site, and then talk a little bit about the conquest, and then pick that back up in lesson 9. So to start our study of Hazor, we're going to look at a map of the site and then show you some pictures of the mound itself so you know what it looks like. The site of Hazor is located in the Jordan Rift Valley, and we've talked about the Jordan Rift Valley before. The Jordan Rift Valley is that lowest place on the earth. It essentially is sitting on top of one of the Earth's major fault lines, the Afro-Arabian fault line. So it's very low-lying, low elevation, which means it would have been very hot in antiquity. And it's located just to the north of the Sea of Galilee. And back in biblical times, there was another lake, and of course the Sea of Galilee is a lake, actually, it's just called a sea. But there's another lake in antiquity in biblical times that was right here called Lake Hula. Nowadays, it's just known as the Hula Valley. It's a very highly cultivated land and very well sought after land because of its ability to grow crops in amazing quality and quantity. So Hazor is located just to the southwest of the Hula Valley here. And that's where Hazor is. It's on the western portion of the Jordan Rift Valley, just north of the Sea of Galilee. If you were to drive from one to the other, which I've done before by car, it's not that far of a drive. But Hazor is also important because it's positioned along the International Highway. Maybe you remember from an earlier lesson, we talked about the Great Trunk Road, which is the highway that in ancient times took you from Egypt and Africa into the Levant and the entire world of Asia. It's that land bridge. It's that road that takes you through the land bridge, the Great Trunk Road. And it just so happens that that Great Trunk Road passes right through the site of Hazor. And here it is. So traffic would come along here, brush by the Sea of Galilee, go through Hazor, and head out this way on the way to Damascus. So in this map, which is north-oriented, unlike our last map, we can see where Hazor is located in relation to some of the things around. Here is the Sea of Galilee below at the bottom of the screen. Hazor here, and then Kiryat Shmona up here. So there's a road essentially that leads down through Hazor and takes you all the way to the Sea of Galilee. So you're welcome to use that road if you ever want to, but Hazor is worth visiting if you get the opportunity. The Bible has something to say about the site of Hazor. Here's what it says in Joshua 10, verse 11. Then Joshua turned back at that time and captured Hazor and struck its king with the sword. For Hazor was formerly the head of all these kingdoms. So if we look back in time from the period of the Judges to the time before Joshua came with the Israelite army and they sacked and destroyed and burned to the ground in many places the city of Hazor, if you look at what it was like before they did this, it was considered to be the head of all those kingdoms. That's how mighty Hazor was. So this is a site that's worth knowing and worth understanding because it yields so much material, so much information to help us understand biblical history better in a lot of ways. Here we see two images. The one on the left is a topographical map showing kind of the big picture with Hazor, because Hazor is divided, not equally, but divided into two halves. This half here, that's shaped a little bit like a Coke bottle, is the upper city of Hazor. That's what we call the Tell. And this portion here, below, topographically, this is the lower city. It's absolutely massive. This site of Hazor is far larger than any other site in the ancient world of the Israelites and the Canaanites. It's the biggest. In this image, we see on the left a photograph taken of the Tell, almost equivalent to the drawing that you can see on the right. So around this lush green grass, you can see the top of the site here. So excavation was done at this point. Excavation was done here and here and here at several points on the Tell itself. And even since this photograph was taken, there's been even more excavation that's done. Hazor continues to be excavated, both especially in the upper city, and now they've returned to do more digging in the lower city. And then on the far right, we see this Coke bottle shape for the site of Hazor, the upper city, the Tell. Area B here in the top, Area G here, Area A here, Area M here. That's where I was involved in digging in Area M. That's an important place. But I just want to let you see something about this map right now that we'll talk about at some point later, which is this Coke bottle itself is divided into half. And it's divided into half right here in the middle of the Tell. What do you mean it was divided into half? Well, in the Canaanite period, the entire upper city was inhabited. And so the wall extended around there, and the people dwelled within the entire upper city of Hazor. But in the Israelite period, when they had conquered the Canaanite and Amorite city, they decided, number one, we're not going to live in the lower city, we're only going to live in the upper city. Number two, they decided we're going to cut the upper city into halves. And this part, what looks to us like the lower part, we're not even going to live there. We're only going to live in this part. And so during the entire Israelite period, when they inhabited Hazor, they only inhabited half of the upper city and none of the lower city, which shows you Hazor never in the Israelite period became the kind of site that it was in the Canaanite period, when it was far greater and far more important in the ancient world. Now we can take several aerial views of the site to see what it looks like. This one shows the upper city to our left here, and you can see how it's raised above from the plains around it and from the lower city, which is here. And you can see the extension of the lower city, how massive it is as it goes all the way around that area. That was all inhabited in the ancient world by the Canaanites. This view of Hazor shows you a little bit closer proximity to the upper city. So here we can see the part of the Tell that was occupied during the Canaanite period, and this, of course, is the lower city below. This is an aerial view from the northeast, focusing on the upper city and showing you the access that there is to the upper city from below. So if you're in a vehicle here down on the road, you can find your way winding upwards and come up onto the tell and see the site of Hazor. And you can visit it today. It's one of the most important sites to visit. So if you do go to Israel, you really need to go to the site of Hazor. There's so much to see. Plus, there is a museum close by where you can see a lot of the artifacts that were excavated from the site itself. And you'll be impressed with what you see in that museum. What can we say about the size of Hazor in ancient times and about the excavations? Who excavated there and when? So let's take a quick look at some of those details before we go further into a study of the site. The first thing to note is that Hazor consists of a rectangular lower city that was approximately 170 acres in size and a bottle-shaped upper city that was about 30 acres in size. And just to give you some perspective, some of the ancient sites are only a few acres, and yet here Hazor's upper city alone is 30 acres, not to mention the 170 plus acres of the lower city. The site at its height rises 40 meters above the plain that's below, so it's a very highly perched site. The upper and lower cities were inhabited during the Amorite and Canaanite occupations, but during the Israelite occupation, they never inhabited the lower city, only that half of the upper city. At Hazor's height, during the late Bronze Age, its population was about 40,000 residents, making it 4 times larger than the second largest site in the ancient world of Canaan by population, which is Lachish. And if you want to compare it to Jerusalem, the site of Hazor enjoyed a population that was 20 times greater than that of the site of Jerusalem. That's how big it was. John Garstang took initial occupations at the site of Hazor in 1926. Yigael Yadin, an Israeli soldier who turned archaeologist, excavated Hazor from 1955 to 58, and then from 68 to 69, which produced some of the most outstanding finds yet discovered in the land of Israel. Amnon Ben Tor, who dug under Yadin, renewed excavations as the chief excavator there in 1990. And from that point until now, excavations there have continued. A major thrust of the current excavations, notably in Area M, is the hunt for a cuneiform archive, that is, a hoard of inscriptions. Archives could exist for the Middle Bronze Age II period, which is by about the end of the period is 1560 BC, could exist for the Late Bronze Age, the end of which would be about 1400 BC, and also there could be an archive for the Late Bronze Age II city, which is basically around 1200 BC, a little bit before, a little bit after, depending on where you're looking in the ancient world. Information relevant to biblical studies certainly may be found in one or more of those archives. And actually, we have enough information from what has been found to, I think, illuminate our understanding of the time of the conquest, at least under Joshua. And we can learn plenty of things about the conquest of the site under Deborah and Barak as well. Now we want to study a few of the periods that Hazor was occupied as we work our way toward the timing of the conquest under Joshua. So first we're going to start with the Middle Bronze Age II period, actually Middle Bronze Age IIB, which in the upper city, by the excavator there, Yadin, he called that the pre-stratum 17 stratum. Down in the lower city, where the numbering is different, in the upper city it's always in Roman numerals, in the lower city it's always in Arabic numbers. But down in the lower city, it's called stratum 4. And so the dates for this occupation at this time are roughly 1750 BC to about 1668 BC. And that's the number we use for the time that the Hyksos have left the Levant and invaded and taken over in Egypt and established a dynasty there. The earliest record of Hazor that we have in written form is the Egyptian execration texts that go back to about 1800 BC. And of course, execration texts are texts where some ancient people decides they're going to write bad things about a neighbor, somebody that they don't like, who becomes an enemy or something. So they write terrible things. Usually they inscribe it, for example, on a pot or something that's made of clay. And then they'll smash it to symbolically suggest what the gods on their behalf are going to do with those ancient people. They're going to smash those people just like I smashed this pot with their name on it. So in those execration texts, what we have is the name of Hazor that's recorded in roughly 1800 BC. Then we also have reference to Hazor in the archives from Mari. Mari is a site where we do have textual archives, and we can read a lot about what happened in the ancient world around the site of Mari, and that's in ancient Syria. And that dates to somewhere between 1827 and 1757 BC, and that's probably tying back to the first full settlement at the site in the final decades of the Middle Bronze IIA period, which again is the time period when Jacob and Joseph and their sons are all establishing themselves, having just moved into Egypt. Hazor's excavations found signs of occupation that date to Middle Bronze IIB, which begins in about 1750 BC. So there's a slight difference in the textual record versus the archaeological record. The archaeological record, from all we know, shows us that they were there in Middle Bronze IIB, but not Middle Bronze IIA. It doesn't mean they didn't live there and reside there in IIA. It doesn't mean that the execration texts were making it up or the Mari archives were fabricating this. It just means we can't really see signs yet, visual signs, that people lived there until Middle Bronze IIB. So that's around 1750 or so BC when we have the first actual attested record in the archaeological record itself. The first fortifications and ramparts of the lower city also date to the Middle Bronze Age IIB, and the buildings in Area C show that enclosure began there at the site. Discoveries in the lower city attest to a large city established and thriving at Hazor during the Middle Bronze IIB period, and that's the time of the Amorite alliance. There's a number of ancient sites in the ancient Near Eastern world, in Mesopotamia, in Syria, and coming all the way down the Fertile Crescent to the site of Hazor. And these cities seem to be in a league. They were in communication, they had trade relations, they were very involved in one another's affairs. And this Amorite coalition included the site of Hazor. So it's very likely that the initial massive occupation at Hazor is Amorite, not specifically Canaanite, but specifically Amorite. And of course, those are one of the people that God tells Abraham that their iniquity has not been complete yet, that they are going to be judged just like the Canaanites. So the Amorites are very wicked people in these times. This slide shows you a little bit about what the Amorite coalition looked like, this alliance that they had. So the city that was farthest to the east in this coalition was Babylon, and you know about that from the days of Daniel and other times. Then there's the city of Mari that had this textual archive, and that was a main important city of the Amorites. And then it extends over to Alalak, which is in the Amuk plain. I was part of an excavation not too far from Alalak at Tel Tayinat. And then down into Katna, and that's another Syrian site in the ancient world that was Amorite. And then that brings us down to Hazor, our site, the site we're looking at. So Hazor is a part of this important ancient coalition. What was the site of Hazor like in Stratum 4 down in the lower city? Well, Hazor's upper city was inhabited side by side with the lower city during Middle Bronze Age IIB. So even at this time, early in the history of Hazor, you had occupation both in the upper city on the Tell and down in the lower city below. Excavations in various areas, including areas A, B, G, L, and AB, show that the Tell was densely populated and highly fortified during Middle Bronze II. Results from excavations under Amnon Ben Tor in the 1990s suggest that the city's population during this time was about 20,000 strong, which demonstrates that this is a formidable city in the ancient world, making Hazor the largest and most important city in the entire southern Levant already. Reasons for Hazor's size? Well, one is the strategic location guarding the Great Trunk Road. Remember, we talked about how the international highway goes through Hazor, so that would cause its population to grow. Because anytime you have a city where people are traveling through it, there's the need for trade. There's the need to sell things to these people, food and water and wine and whatever they would need, you could sell to them as they come through your city. Also, second, Hazor has a reliable water source. You can get all the water you need. We've talked about the site of Gibeon, and we know about the underground spring that was there. Well, Hazor had an underground water source too, and that provided for all of the inhabitants of the site. So that was something that caused people to be able to live there. They knew that they would be able to sustain themselves with water. The third reason for Hazor's ascendance is that it was a highly defensible position. If you can defend yourself in the ancient world, you can build a formidable city, and you can, in most cases, be safe. It would take a great effort to unseat you from your position. What was Hazor like in the lower city at this time? Well, Stratum 4's gate was slightly to the rear of the natural slope and approached by a gradual ascent constructed of beaten earth laid in alternate layers of basaltic flakes and clays, along with crushed yellowish chalk rock and brown brick clay. The defensive wall around the perimeter of the site was erected during this time, which is known from how the construction of the earliest temple, that's in Stratum 3, was after the leveling of Area H and the filling up of the ground level up to the edge of the rampart. The city wall near the gate stood on the lower ground and consisted of two parallel walls joining the glacis where it reached the higher level. And of course, a glacis is usually consisting of beaten earth, but it's going to provide defensibility because it gives you a slope, usually at the base of a wall, and it would make it so that anyone attacking you had nothing to hide behind, but they would be stuck out in the open on top of that surface. The real beauty of Hazor's defensive fortification was the rampart, or the revetment wall, as it's oftentimes called. And you can see in this image, this person standing at the base of the revetment wall. How easy would it be to climb this wall? It would be very difficult to climb this wall. In antiquity, it may have been plastered, but even if it wasn't, it would be extremely difficult to scale it because of its great slope and the difficulty you would have in getting good footing. Plus, you would be attacked from the people above who are protecting their city. So this defensive wall, this revetment wall, acted as the first line of defense to protect from the people who would be wanting to invade you. This image shows you the revetment wall here with its bow and the glacis around it, as well as this moat here. So it's difficult to know what would be filled in this moat in antiquity, but certainly it would have been difficult to scale the wall, let alone to get to it because of the moat that was here, even if it were empty. So this stone glacis and moat dates back to about 1725 to 1560. So its use was continuous for this period, and it was a formidable defensive system to protect the city from all attackers. Now we're going to move on to the Middle Bronze IIC period, the period after Middle Bronze IIB. In the upper city, that's known as post-stratum 16 in Roman numerals, and down in the lower city, it's known as stratum 3. The dates for this period are basically from 1668 BC to about 1560 BC. So that's roughly the window of time when it was occupied during Middle Bronze Age IIC. What was the site of Hazor like during Middle Bronze IIC? Well, In area F, a large building with thick walls was constructed on a rectangular plan, which Yadin interpreted as a double temple that was consecrated to two deities. The temple of stratum 3 in area H consisted of a broad hall with a small rectangular niche, which is a place for an idol of a god to be placed, and it was on the northern side. The entire area around the temple was paved with small cobblestones. Stratum 3's gate featured a casemate wall, one of the earliest found in Canaan. The wall evidently continued for only a short distance before joining the rampart of the lower city. Stratum 3 was destroyed by a great conflagration, which is a destruction by fire. And this image shows you the results, the remnants of that. Much of it has been cleaned off, but you can see part of this burn line material here at the base on this cobblestone pavement. Here there was a layer of ashes and brick debris that was on the floor of the last gate in area K, demonstrating the death and destruction that took place at the site at the end of the Middle Bronze Age. The final occupational phase we're going to look at in this lesson is Late Bronze Age I at Hazor. If you remember, that's the time period that's connected to the conquest under Joshua. So the Israelites at the end of Late Bronze Age I worked their way into Canaan. Late Bronze Age I at Hazor consists of a settlement on the Tell, that is Upper City Stratum 15 in Roman numerals, and Stratum 2 in Arabic numbers down in the lower city below. The dating for that is approximately 1560 BC is when it begins, and it ends in roughly 1400 BC. And according to biblical chronology, we would say that Hazor is actually destroyed in the very year of 1400 BC, based on proper synchronization. Let's look at Hazor at the time of the Late Bronze Age, that period when, at its end, Joshua and his forces would come and destroy the city. Stratum 2 in the lower city represents the city that was inhabited during Late Bronze Age I, which sat above a thick ash layer, which means the city right before it was destroyed by fire. In area F, part of the temple from Stratum 3 was reconstructed, while other architectural features remained in disuse. In area H, the temple of Stratum 2 is identical with that of its predecessor. And what that suggests to us strongly is that there was a cultural continuity between the previous residents at Hazor and these new residents in Late Bronze Age I. If it were a completely different culture, they almost certainly would not have used the exact same design, architectural design for their temples, because they would have implemented the designs that reflect their form of cultic activity and worship. The floor was paved with large cobblestones, which were plastered with a white, limey clay that was typical of Late Bronze Age I. A large bama, which means a high place, a place where worship took place, and of course the Israelites were instructed not to use the high places for worship because they were connected with pagan deities. So there was a large bama that was found there in the nearby court. It's no surprise that the Amorites or the Canaanites would be using a bama for their worship in the high places. Now we're going to look at the temple at Hazor in two successive phases of its occupation. First in the Middle Bronze Age IIC and second in the Late Bronze Age I. So here is the Stratum 3 Middle Bronze Age II city. And so this area here is the entryway or portico. It doesn't seem to have had pillars and a roof that was overhead. It's probably an open court. And entry comes here into the antecella. This room right before the cella is called the antecella entryway, and then probably two rooms for storage on either side. But if you wanted to go into the cella, which is the most important room, and in the Bible we know of this as a Holy of Holies, this room was entered through this passageway, which was guarded by two doors. And of course, the deity itself, the God who inhabited this temple, was placed within this niche. And a niche, of course, is a recess that's in the wall, purposefully put there to be able to house the God, kind of in safety, protected from all of the elements around that are in the room. There are two holes here for pillars, so undoubtedly this would have had a ceiling, so a roof was above, and the pillars held up that roof. And so this cella is the Holy of Holies, the inner room of the god at the time. And what we see is that the late Bronze Age I temple in Stratum 2 is just about exactly the same. You have a similar entryway, which doesn't, once again, have columns and a roof. It's maybe not as large with its open court, but it has just about the same entryway into the antecella with the same style of rooms on either side, the same type of entrance into the cella. And then the cella looks almost exactly the same as in the prior phase, with our two pillars here holding up the roof. But here we have one difference, which is an enclosure was added to the niche so that the god could be housed separately and not visible to the average priest or whoever walks into the Holy of Holies. So it would be an element of protection so that the god is in isolation, in protection. Just a final note, though, on the comparison of these two temples is that, again, the similarity is not to be lost. This suggests cultural continuity between the last occupants and these occupants. We already mentioned that there was a bama found here in this cultic area. Well, near the bama, where the sacrificial animals were slaughtered, a single drainage channel was discovered that in part consisted of discarded incense stands. On the other side of the court was a pottery kiln that still contained a large number of votive bowls. And this is an image of some of these bowls that were found. Many of them still complete in beautiful form, some of them probably needing some repair. But this shows and reflects the cultic activity that took place here using the bowls in the worship process. Here is a favisa, a place for discarded cultic vessels, such as, for example, a clay cow's liver. And a cow's liver, of course, is what they used in the ancient world for divination, to be able to appeal to the gods, to try to gain access and favor and have the gods perform things on their behalf, and in some cases to do things at their request so that the people would be able to benefit from what the gods could give them. Speaking of a cow's liver, this is a clay model of a cow's liver right here. The first fragment reads this, and this is really important because, again, this refers to the time period when the Israelites are just about to conquer the city. And here's how it reads. One king is bending down another. An enemy is attacking my country. Forgiveness will be granted to the men by the God. A servant will rebel against his Lord. The second fragment reads, Ishtar, the goddess of war, will consume the land. Nergal, the solar deity, will do such and such. The gods of the city will come back. So this is a very pessimistic tone that the author of this inscription on a clay cow's liver is offering. He is very depressed. There's trouble. There is an enemy attacking his country. Somebody is on the outskirts of the city waiting to come in and take them down. Who are those people? And he says, forgiveness will be granted to the men by the God. So he's already almost resigned to the fact that these people are going to be successful. In fact, on the second fragment, it makes it clear. Because Ishtar, he says, will consume the land. Ishtar is going to stand up for them, the goddess of war. In the Levant, we know her as Ashtoreth or Ashtarte. And then he says that Nergal, the solar deity, will do something. And then he says the gods of the city will come back. And the idea is that the gods of the city have left them already. Their gods have turned them over to these people and the gods of these people. And of course, who are these people who are about to finish the job of attacking and take the city out as he's anticipating? According to the Bible, they're the Israelites. The end of this phase, late Bronze Age I, is highlighted by the destruction of the city under Joshua. The excavations of 1955 to 58 showed that both the upper and lower cities were settled in the late Bronze Age I. This is attested mainly by the floors and fragmentary walls in Area A and by the considerable quantity of late Bronze Age I pottery, including bichrome and Mycenaean ware. The full significance of the highly developed culture of the late Bronze Age I Hazor was realized only in 1968 when Yadin's team ascertained that the last phase of the long temple in the upper city actually belonged to the late Bronze Age I. This temple was located adjacent to the king's palace, and all of its remnants and its remains were found covered by a thick layer of brick, indicating that the temple never was reconstructed. Where is Area M on the site? It's in the upper city on the tell, right here on the corner, the center and the corner. In this image, you can see it right at the area of the city wall during the Canaanite phase. This is Area M in modern times, looking at some of the excavation that was done here. The Israelite period is up in here. The Persian period is up in this level. But down here is the Canaanite period. This actually is basaltic material from a temple that was built there in Area M. And this is a podium, and we'll talk about that later. But below it is late Bronze Age I material down here. How did the destruction of Hazor at the end of late Bronze I look in the eyes of the excavator? Well, here's what Amnon Ben-Tor, the chief excavator from 1990 until present, said. He said, 2 fragmentary walls were built on top of the paved late Bronze Age IIB street, so that's a time immediately after late Bronze Age I, which were found covered by the destruction layer, marking the end of the entire architectural assemblage, indicating that the last phase of occupation here was of a rather poor nature. The pit cut into an earlier accumulation of fallen mud bricks and ashes. So before he was talking about late Bronze IIB, and now he's talking about the previous period. And this period is late Bronze Age I, where Joshua destroyed. And he says that the pit cut into this earlier accumulation of fallen mud bricks and ashes. So clearly that city was destroyed by fire. The Bible says there were 3 cities destroyed by Joshua with fire: Jericho, Ai, and of course, Hazor. So this would be a fulfillment of what the Bible says. This is the only clear indication found so far for an earlier destruction, still in the late Bronze Age, predating the final destruction of the last Canaanite city, and that's at the end of late Bronze II, sometimes called late Bronze III. That earlier phase, that is late Bronze Age I, Joshua's day, extending beyond the excavated area, was apparently of a substantial nature, as indicated by an orthostat associated with it. Then, the Hazor excavation report from the following year, from 2001, reads like this. This earlier phase ended in a conflagration. That's the end of late Bronze Age I. Ended in a burning by fire. Similar to the one that brought an end to the later phase, to the final Canaanite city destroyed by Deborah and Barak at the end of late Bronze II. The ceramic assemblage, that's the pottery, associated with this earlier phase, albeit meager, seems to place the date of this earlier destruction somewhere in the late Bronze Age I, which is the 15th century BC. That's the destruction under Joshua. So the chief excavator himself, who does not believe that the Israelites were there and destroyed the city at the end of the 15th century BC, admitted here in his 2 excavation reports, the one of 2000 and the one of 2001, that Hazor of late Bronze Age I age was destroyed by a massive conflagration, just like the destruction of the site at the end of the late Bronze Age under Deborah and Barak. What kind of signs are there that we can see with our own eyes to show us that there was a destruction by fire there at the end of late Bronze Age I? Well, here you have it, photographs that I took while on the dig there in 2007. Inside the red box, and this was pointed out to me by the area supervisor, Sharon Zuckerman, who oversaw the excavations here in Area M at the time. And she took me down and showed me the earlier excavations before I was part of the dig that showed me, and she pointed this out and said, you see all of these dark marks here, the thick darkness, she said, this is the burn layer from late Bronze Age I. So there's a perfect sign of the destruction under Joshua in Area M. Then we also see signs of the destruction if we look at another area. And here you can see clearly that burn line, a thick burn line, material that's been charred from fire. And then between it and this cobblestone pavement above, and this is the pavement of late Bronze Age IIA, this is the next occupational phase, the next archaeological period in the record anywhere. So there was a reestablishing of occupation at the site in the next period. Between the two is a gap of, in some places, 1 meter in size, which shows you, number one, it's an occupational gap, but number two, it could mean that there's a long time distance between the two, but it doesn't have to mean that, especially when people purposefully put dirt and soil and grainy materials and stones in there as fill to kind of cover up the previous occupation so that they can build on top of it and have a fresh look and a fresh appearance. So that's exactly what happened. They dumped a bunch of fill on top of the charred remains, and then on top of it they laid a cobblestone pavement. This is the cobblestone pavement that's connected to the work and the ministry of Deborah and Barak, the judges that we read about in the book of Judges. Here's another view of that occupational gap. We see from late Bronze Age I with the charred remains here to the cobblestone pavement above, and here, look at this massive distance with this occupational gap, showing clearly you have a delineation, strong delineation between the occupational phases. And that previous phase was so disastrous, it had to be covered up in a thick compilation of debris and material. So clearly we have strong, powerful evidence of the destruction under Joshua at the end of late Bronze Age I at Hazor, one of the 3 sites that the Bible says was destroyed by fire. And this confirms in the archaeological record what we see written about in the Bible, that the Israelites indeed destroyed these cities and burned them up in some cases with fire, such as Hazor. So next time, we're going to look further at the site of Hazor, a little bit more as far as the conquest itself, but then we're going to move down into the final Canaanite occupation and into the Israelite occupation of Hazor to see what it looked like in the days of the Israelites. And we'll do that in our next lesson of our course, Basics of Biblical Archaeology. We'll see you there.